It's good to see everyone. We may have others still joining us, but let's get started. Welcome to this virtual space and to this evening. An evening with Lori Guenther Reesor and the launch of her new book, Growing a Generous Church, A Year in the Life of Peace Blossom Church. It's good to celebrate this launch together. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Arlen. I'm the director of Common Word, a national Anabaptist bookstore and resource center jointly operated by Canadian Mennonite University and Mennonite Church Canada. We're grateful to be hosting this event. Normally, before COVID, we would meet for an event like this in person in a beautiful glass atrium just outside Common Word. But as comfortable as that might be without COVID, we certainly would not have the same attendance tonight. So it's a very big privilege of mine to express my warm greetings and welcome to all of you from across Canada, across the Ecumenical Church, and of course, many from Lori's own communities in Ontario. Tonight's conversation is being recorded and will live on Common Word's website and be available to those unable to be here in real time. So I also welcome future viewers to this conversation as well. Please make sure your mic is muted so there's no audio interference. If you need to be in touch with me or have a question for Lori, please use the chat function. Toward the end of the program, there will be a question and answer period. I'll reserve your questions for that time. A short 10-minute opportunity in breakout groups will be another chance to engage any questions or comments that you have. Lori has planned a special 1-hour event tonight, and in addition to what she will say about the story behind the book, she has also invited a couple of guests to share. Bryan Moyer Suderman is a friend and songwriter from Kitchener and will later provide several musical numbers. His CD, My Money Talks, is generously being offered free of charge when paired with the purchase of Lori's book. I'll say more about that at the end of the program. A second special guest, Carol Penner, friend, assistant professor of theological studies at Conrad Grebel University College in Waterloo, and whose endorsement appears on the front page of the book, will give a short review. But before she does that, Lori has prepared a brief introductory video, which I will now share.
Happy spring. It's Lori Guenther Reesor here. I'm in my backyard and I'm happy to report that the crocuses are up. So that's good news. And I also have good news because these are proofs of my new book that I got from the printer. You can see that one is matte and one is shiny. And I want to tell you the story about that. It's Growing a Generous Church, A Year in the Life of Peach Blossom Church. So you can see that this is a peach. And initially I thought that a shiny cover would be super nice. And my ever practical son, who is an engineer, looked at both of these and said, peaches aren't shiny. So there you go. It's a matte cover. And the book designer, John Van Duzer, and I have been having a laugh about that ever since. God didn't make no shiny peaches. So it's a matte book. And if you were to look at this book, which I really hope you do, you would see that in addition to this beautiful cover, that it's full of illustrations because it's a year in the life of Peach Blossom Church. So there's January, there's February, there's March, there's April. It's full of stories and people drinking coffee and talking about the Bible and money and sharing their stories of how they learned to give. A lot of these things in the book are based on churches that I've met with, either through my research, my Doctor of Ministry research, or in my own consulting practice. So what people have told me is that this book really rings true for them, like it sounds like people that they've met. So I'm really excited about that. If you look in the back of the book, in addition to things like endorsements and a hopeful story for churches who are scared to talk about money, you'll also find discussion questions that your church could use. What else did I want to tell you? I definitely wanted to show you February because February is my favorite illustration. Let me get it here. There we go. Here's February. It is a picture of a snowblower. Fortunately, that season is behind us right now. But in February, the people at Peach Blossom are really happy because they thank God for the people who clear the snow because no one has fallen and broken a hip in the church parking lot. And I really like that this is a book that has a picture of a snowblower because it's real. I mean it to speak to people's real experiences and to be accessible. And I really hope that this book can help churches get over the fear of talking about money and embrace the spiritual discipline of giving, which is a joyful way that we can learn to be the church together. It's a discipleship thing and not a budget thing. So I'm thankful that after a long process of working on this book, that it's here, that it looks lovely, and that it's accessible. I do hope that you and people from your church will be able to read this book, and I trust that God will use it. That's really my prayer, is that a hopeful story for churches who are scared to talk about money, that this will help. So if you would like to read an excerpt of my book, it's on my website, and there's more information there about how you can get one. Thank you.
Carol, why don't you go ahead?
Hello, everyone. My name is Carol Penner, and I'm really happy to be here to talk to you for a couple of minutes about this great book. Lori, I am so happy to see this book in print. It is beautiful. I like the matte cover. And the thing I wondered about is whether you planned it so that the book launch of Peach Blossom's story would coincide with Peach Blossom season. I thought that was a really nice touch for tonight. I think it's a great resource for the church for a number of reasons. First, I don't think we talk about money and faithfulness enough. Finances are a difficult subject to talk about, and we do talk about them, but it's often divorced from discussions of our theology. But money discussions in the church need to happen, and it's remarkably complex to figure out how to do that. And that leads to the second reason that I think it's a great resource. I think the format of using a story allows Lori to really delve into the nuances of what money means. This engaging story format is a way that the reader is drawn into the life of a church and the people who go there. What does money mean? How are they making decisions? What scenarios are they facing? How do you even start a money conversation that's more than about the bottom line of your budget? Lori has her characters facing a variety of scenarios that are very true to life. I teach at Conor Gribble University College in the Master of Theological Studies program. Lori has come into our classroom to lead a discussion about money and stewardship with my ministry students. It was an excellent class, and what struck me was how well Lori listened to the students as she asked them questions, and they shared about their experiences with finances and money and God from a variety of ecumenical settings. And that leads to the third reason I think it's a great resource. This book reflects deep listening that Lori has done, visiting churches, talking to individuals in her consulting work. There's a wide variety of churches and a wide variety of voices that have lent their wisdom. And Lori's been able to draw on that by her good listening skills and her really delightful writing skills too. And now this book is a gift that she gives back to the church after so many people shared their stories with her. Finally, it is a beautiful book to hold in your hands. I just love the cover, and the illustrations found in every chapter are lovely too. Thank you, Lori, and congrats on this book. I hope that everyone makes sure that this is a book in their church library and recommend it to small groups in your church who might be looking for a book to study. I think it would work really well for a summer study group as well. And I want to close with a limerick that I wrote for Lori. There once was a theologian named Lori who wrote her ideas in a story. She talked a lot about money. It was serious and funny, but mostly it was all for God's glory. Thanks, Lori.
Thanks, Carol. And Lori, let's turn to you.
I was ready to just keep listening, and it's so beautiful to see the peach blossom. That's excellent. I couldn't have imagined that. That's just a God thing. That can be the only explanation for that. So I even wrote down what I'm going to say, and my husband, who's here, was really impressed by that because that's not normally my jam. But you should set a timer because I could talk indefinitely. It's so good to see everybody, and I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for coming. I'm excited, as I said. I'm also a little bit terrified. I figured that if I started introducing my family, there's a 40% chance that I would start crying. And I guess I recognize increasingly that my family is one of the best examples of God's generosity that I can imagine. And that's no small gift. So a book, Growing a Generous Church. This has been something that I've been working on, writing for almost 3 years, but honestly, it's probably been more like a 14-year project, and I just didn't realize that I was writing it all the time. I've done lots of academic writing. I did my master's thesis, I did my doctoral thesis, and I can assure you that academic writing and trying to write a work of creative nonfiction about the church have absolutely nothing in common. It's not the same words, it's not the same anything. I could talk about the church and money forever because I'm passionate about it. So really set a timer so that I'll stop. The 3 questions that I wanted to answer though are, what's this book about? What is he talking about creative nonfiction in the church? So that's one. The second one is, why did I write it? And that's a seriously large question. And the third thing I thought I should tell you is what was my favorite part about writing the book? Because I thought, I kind of wanted to know the answer to that one as well. If you have questions, please type them in the chat. I'm used to being interrupted and I kind of work better that way. The questions that don't kind of integrate to the conversation now, we'll have a Q&A time at the end. So it's hard to separate the story of writing a book from the story of me. And in academic writing, you're supposed to take the story of you and pretend that it doesn't exist, but it does. I'm a person from a specific context. And so maybe I'll tell you a little bit about the story of me because the story of the me and the book we're kind of close. Once upon a time, there was a hilarious giver. And they really must have had a wild sense of humor. They gave money to Conrad Grebel University College for a bursary. And that bursary helps students do a volunteer term through Mennonite Central Committee in my case. So they sent a math student, a statistics major no less, to volunteer at teaching English, English teaching assistant in Egypt. So that is hilarious. Some students probably did improve their English. I did my very best. But the person whose life was really changed by that little experience was me. After I graduated, there's lots more to this story. I'm just trying to hit the highlights. I took a job with World Vision. Some of you are here from that time, so that's cool. And I've been working with churches and charities in one way or another ever since. And that was quite a long time ago now. When my kids were little, like 6 and 8, I think, I started my Master of Theological Studies degree. And I was just writing this down today and going, really, did you? I was by this time also a pastor, and Jean is here and she can tell the story better. So I was a part-time pastor, a half-time student, and a full-time parent because my husband Barry was working in Labrador 2 weeks out of 4 at the time, and the other 2 weeks he was still working. He wasn't off. And I just wrote that down today and went, huh, how did you do that? Like, that was quite astonishing. And then we moved to Australia partway through my studies, and I finished my coursework in Brisbane. And that's also where I did most of the work for my thesis, which was about Paul's collection for Jerusalem in 2 Corinthians 8 and 9. And Tom Yoder-Neufeld was my supervisor, and I still hear his voice when I look at those texts. Coming back to Canada, I worked with charities some more. And it's a really odd place. I've seen a lot of databases of Christian charities. And it's a really odd thing to be able to be like seeing the names and recognizing the names of givers on one hand and seeing some incredible generosity to charities. So that's one hand. On the other hand, I'm hearing church people say, well, we got to shrink the budget. We got to cut back because people can't give. And I'm thinking, hold on, these are the same people. They are giving, just not to you. And that's a really hard truth to carry. I think church people would rather think that there isn't money than think that people have chosen to do something else with it. So yeah, that's sort of one of the tensions of studying this sort of thing and doing the work that I do. I went back to school again, this time for my Doctor of Ministry degree at Tyndale. My kids call me Dr. Mother when they really want to yank my chain. I don't know why that works, but it does. I continued my research on Christian giving, and this time Abundance Canada was able to sponsor what I call my church basement tour from British Columbia to Ontario. I made a number of trips, and I heard such wonderful stories, treasures of how people learn to be faithful. And it was just really humbling, and it really a strong motivation for me to do this book so that I can be a good steward of the stories that have been entrusted to me. At the same time, sad to think that I was the only person hearing these stories, these testimonies of God's faithfulness to them weren't being shared in church, because that would be talking about money, and that wasn't perceived to be the thing. I had permission to transcribe and record every word, and so that's really informed what I do, and I'm grateful to Carol for celebrating listening, because I guess that was even more of this book than I've realized. Since then, I've worked with churches from a variety of denominations, in person, workshops, webinars, sermons, meetings, all sorts of things, and some of you are here, so thank you. So what I did to write a book, and I would not recommend that you do this, is I threw everything, all my blog posts, every webinar, all my notes, I threw it all into one big Word document, and the resulting mess got edited several times, and became a book. It became the story of Peach Blossom. My editor, Susan Fish, said, you can't talk about everything. Is there one thing you can talk about? And the Circle of Grace model is foundational to, it's giving in response to a grateful God. And that became really central in the book, and it's beautifully illustrated with a peach too. So Peach Blossom is a fictional church, but it's based on the many people that I've met in church basements, and well, sometimes above ground too, to be fair. So that's sort of how my story and the story of this book intersect. So to answer those 3 questions, what's the book about? It's a hopeful story for churches who are scared to talk about money. I'm kind of aiming for the wealthy barber of Christian giving. I know that people are looking for examples, because my most popular blog post is people looking for a thank you letter, and churches using that same letter to send out. So I'm hopeful that this book will get the conversation started, but also be really practical in ways that churches can use right away. I know people and churches are looking for something that they can really, they can dig into immediately. Pastor Kim in the church takes a really active role, but a church without a pastor could still do this, and I've seen it done. So the discussion guide is really meant for churches to engage and to make it their own and talk about, you can talk about Peach Blossom, but really what I hope is that the churches talk about themselves and what their story is. Why did I write this book? I guess I had to. I can't keep all these stories to myself. I care about the church. I don't think the church is dead. I think the church has some serious reimagining to do, but I don't think it's dead. I think we need the church. I wrote this book because there's lots of stewardship books out there, and very few of them have pictures or jokes. And I thought that needed to be addressed. Did I just say that? Yes, I did. Some of my favorite stories are here. The garbage bags full of money story, which anyone who's talked to me for any length of time will have heard, is there. The story of someone learning to be generous because they saw their dad counting out piles of money on the table on payday, and the first pile was for the church. Those are sacred stories, and we need to tell them that testimony is testimony to gratitude and to God's generosity, but it's a testimony of a faithful life. And this isn't about the budget. I mean, incorporating the spiritual discipline of giving into our faith is like, this is a following Jesus thing. More money for the budget is like a nice byproduct, but this is a discipleship thing. And this is where Lori gets seriously off track and starts waving her hands and like she doesn't know what question she's talking about. But I care about the church, and that's why I wrote this book. We think of money as being kind of serious and scary and terrifying, and when we make it secret, it gives it money so much more power than it deserves to have. Okay, look at this piece of paper. I'm trying to follow my notes. What was my favorite part about writing the book? Getting to know the characters. I would sit at the Art Gallery of Ontario in the members lounge, and these characters wrote themselves on the best days. And it's like, oh, Keith, is that how you learned to be generous? I didn't know. Or Eunice, who is a retired teacher, and Lee, who's a millennial. Eunice has no idea how much it costs to go to university these days. And Lee doesn't really know much about retirement planning, but they share what they're worried about, and they really learn from each other. So that was so cool. It's like, oh, you guys go. This is great. So I hope that this book can be the church, that it can help the church to talk about money, that Jesus talks about money, we can too. I hope that it can help the church in all of its messiness and its beauty. And this book is the gift to the church that I care about. And now Bryan is going to sing a couple of songs. He is actually, before we started this, I think he almost wrote a new song, but I'm really grateful that his songs testify to God's generosity too.
Working on it, Lori, but I won't quite be quite so bold as to try it out here already now. But yeah, thanks for the little tip, even as in the sound check beforehand, to what's a key phrase you'd love to see us sing. You see, this is the kind of conversation I've been having with Lori for a long, long time. I'm so delighted as a friend and colleague of Lori's to have this chance to be invited to be part of this and to celebrate with you, Lori, this achievement and this work and this gift that you are giving. Thank you for that. And it's been fun for me to get to know some of these characters from Peach Blossom over the last while in various coffee conversations with Lori here and there, bits of, as we would have talk about all kinds of things. And then, some of those characters would poke through in the conversation. So Lori's been living with this, yes, for lots of ways and for a long time. So I'd like to sing for you a couple of songs that came out of a process of also in my case, it was at the invitation of Abundance Canada, then the Mennonite Foundation Canada, to help see what we could do to help congregations sing about money. So Lori has talked about her passion for helping congregations talk about money, who maybe are scared to talk about money. So this project, in my case, a number of years ago, was about helping congregations to sing about money in the context of worship. So a couple of songs that I hope can be maybe part of a bit of a soundtrack for Peach Blossom Church. Thanks again, Lori, for this chance to share. And by the way, as we're learning to sing on Zoom and do congregational singing even, if you find yourself singing along, feel free to keep yourselves muted there. That's a good thing to do. But if you find yourself singing along with the repeated choruses of these songs, that's entirely appropriate and wonderful. feel free to do that right where you are. There is a generous God that we believe in, a generous God on whom we depend, a generous God that we belong to, a generous God who calls us friends. All the earth is the Lord's, and every living thing draws each breath from you, and so we sing to you, our generous God that we believe in, a generous God on whom we depend, a generous God that we belong to, a generous God who calls us friends. You make the sun to shine on good and evil alike, and the rain to fall on everyone, 'cause you're a generous God that we believe in, a generous God on whom we depend, a generous God that we belong to, a generous God who calls us friends. With such a generous God, how can we but give? And overflowing with thanks, we bring our gifts to you, our generous God that we believe in, a generous God on whom we depend, a generous God that we belong to, a generous God who calls us friends. I can give with joy because I trust in you. I can give with joy knowing that you'll do greater things than I could ever imagine to be true. And I can play a part and give myself to you. Like Zacchaeus, I can make financial plans of how to benefit myself, my family, and my friends. And like Zacchaeus, who welcomed you into his home and announced a change of plan, I can give with joy because I trust in you. I can give with joy, knowing that you'll do greater things than I could ever imagine to be true. And I can play a part and give myself to you. And like the rich young man who followed all the rules and read his Bible every day, I am so easily seduced by what I have. It makes it hard for me to say, I can give with joy because I trust in you. I can give with joy knowing that you'll do greater things than I could ever imagine to be true. And I can play a part and give myself to you. And like the child who hung out with the crowd that day on the mountain long ago, when all the grown-ups didn't know what they could do, and all I have to offer is some fish and a couple loaves. I can give with joy because I trust in you. I can give with joy knowing that you'll do greater things than I could ever imagine to be true. And I can play a part and give myself to you. I can give with joy.
Thank you, Bryan. Lori wants the opportunity to meet each of you a bit more closely and offer an opportunity for each of you to meet each other, at least a few of, like in smaller groups. And so we will spend 10 minutes in a small breakout group. Lori, you have a question for us.
Yes, I'd be interested, if you're comfortable, share what your context is, where you are, who your people are, and what are you grateful for? This is one of the questions I ask churches. What are 3 things that you're grateful for? Sometimes the things that we complain about are actually the things that, if we think about it, we're grateful for. So that might be something to think about too. But I was just thinking that if we were all together, you would want to chat with your neighbor. So I'm hoping that works.
So I will assign you to breakout rooms, and then we will gather after that for a larger Q&A time with Lori. Okay, I think we're all back. And we'd like to spend a few minutes in a Q&A if you have a question for or a comment for Lori. I think the best way maybe to do this is to just write in the chat the word share, and I'll ask you to unmute your mic. There's a question or comment about a bit more. If you could, Lori, if you could just say a bit more about what was your favorite part of writing the book.
My favorite part is that by the end, the staff at the Art Gallery of Ontario knew that I wanted more hot water for the tea, and I didn't really have to ask. No, the favorite part was the characters, because they took on a life of their own. I mean, I'm new to characters and plot. Academic writing is kind of lacking in both. And it was just so fun to see, like, to learn about the characters, especially when they interact with each other, or I would find out something new about them. There's a guy named Keith who runs an auto supply shop, and he's a deep thinker. And I didn't know why he was generous. He's really generous. He's key to the book. He says this is all God's stuff. And it makes it easier to give away. When you think it's my stuff, you hold on tight. When it's God's stuff, you let loose. And he told the story of how he learned to be generous. And it was, honestly, it wasn't like I was writing it. It was just like listening to Keith tell his story. And that was so cool. So I really, and it's, part of it is just keeping up with what the people are telling me. Like, I know Keith is based on someone I did meet, but he became a full person. So that was fun.
I think Lori,
it's all God's stuff. It's all God's stuff. It's easier to give when you know it's God's stuff. It's all God's stuff. It's all God's stuff. It's so much easier to give when you know it's God's stuff. There, Lori.
Yes. Exactly that. Exactly that.
Sensing character development in the people you got to know in your writing is probably one of your surprises. Amy asks, what most surprised you about your writing process? Do you have something else to share in that regard?
how long it took, how naive I was. That said, I think I have another couple of books that just like in the cutting room floor, so to speak.
What were you naive about?
I thought I could do it in less time than a thesis. A thesis has a deadline, and at a certain point you don't care about it anymore. You just want it to be formatted correctly, and you do it. I care about this one more, to be honest. And being able to write however I want, I thought would be tremendously freeing, and it is. But then it also means that that you can do, it's a little bit paralyzing. There isn't someone saying it must be in 12 point, it must be written this in this way.
I really was struck by your comment that church people would love to believe that there is no money out there instead of money being diverted somewhere else or somehow being held close. Could you say more about that?
I definitely had a person in church leadership tell me, and with all sincerity, that everyone in the church was tithing. And I thought, oh, I knew how much people gave to the church, and I knew that they drove cars, which seemed extraordinary on the salary that they must, on the, if what they were giving to the church was 10% of their income, I don't know how they could possibly afford a car. And then, yeah, so I just had to, like, really? People in your church make $10,000 a year? So no one wants to hear that. So I don't want to just talk when I talk to a church, and have, there's space to have those difficult conversations. But the first question I always ask is what they're grateful for about their church. A couple of things, in fact, and they have to be able to celebrate that. And every church that has something to be grateful for, every single one, even the ones that are struggling a lot, even the ones that are fighting, we have something to be grateful for, and we have hope. And when we can start with that gratitude for what God has given us and what we have, even though the struggles can be real, then we have room to have those conversations. But we have to start with the great gratitude part. Otherwise, I don't want to be just thudding at people. We have to start with ingratitude.
I think there's a lot of people with gratitude for what you've all said tonight. With the question, how would you like to be invited to share your book with churches, reflects that.
How would I like to be invited to share my book with churches? Start a book club. It would be super cool to have a book club that has people from different denominations in it too, because we have the same concerns. In the stewardship forums that I participate, where there's people from different backgrounds, and I also speak with we call ourselves an Abrahamic trio of fundraisers, a Jewish, Muslim, and Christian fundraiser, and we have great conversations too. So there's so much in common that I wonder if the stewardship people working together are sort of the leading edge of an ecumenical movement. So that's a really long answer, but I'd be happy to work with churches in any capacity, and I particularly am tickled by the idea of churches of different denominations working together.
And as said before, it's so much of a privilege to have a wide ecumenical group here tonight. I appreciate that. Any final question for Lori? What's your next book, Lori?
Clover Seed. It's a smaller church.
Oh, so you have one in the works.
Well, it got cut from the first one. I think it's halfway written already.
Nice. Well, this one's published, and you're offering one as a gift, as a raffle draw tonight, and Bryan's offering his CD. And before we met, I randomly selected window number 24, and that is Karen Plater on my screen. And so we'll be glad to give you this, Karen. If you stay on afterwards, we can talk about particulars, how to get that to you. For those of you who do not yet have a copy, Growing a Generous Church is available to either borrow or to buy from Common Word. You can certainly be in touch with Lori directly. To order from Common Word, just simply go to our website, commonword.ca, and you can borrow, you can buy, you can purchase the book on its own, you can purchase it with the free CD if you so choose. It's been a good evening. Thank you each for coming. Thank you, Lori. Let's give Lori just our warm appreciation. This is what our church does. I don't know if this is common. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for hosting.
And thank you, Carol and Bryan, for your input and your connection with the story and with Lori's story, and for sharing today. May we continue to learn of ways to talk about money in the church.
Mm-hmm.
I wish you all safety and good health. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Have a lovely evening, everyone.
Good job, Lori.
Thank you.
Great job, Lori.
Great.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Terrific.
Thank you, Lori.
Thanks.
Thank you, Lori.